Here's something that almost slipped past the news cycle. In the middle of one of the most technologically advanced military campaigns in modern history, someone quietly asked a question that nobody in power seemed prepared to answer. Who taught the machine to choose the target? 15,247. That's not a statistic someone handed us. That's a number that emerged from independent defense analysts cross-referencing strike data, operational timelines, and AI. Deployment logs from the Iran war theater, more than 15,000 individual attacks coordinates selected, timing calculated, collateral damage estimated run through artificial intelligence systems before a single human commander signed off. Some reports suggest the sign-off was itself increasingly a formality. Here's the thread that doesn't add up. Every major Western government has, for the past decade, published frameworks, white papers, and international commitments insisting that lethal autonomous decision-making requires meaningful human control. That phrase, meaningful human control, appears in NATO doctrine, in United Nations resolutions, in the public testimony of defense secretaries and technology executives. It became almost a mantra, and yet here we are with a documented body of evidence suggesting that in one active conflict, the scale and speed of AI-assisted targeting made that meaningful control nearly impossible by design. The system was optimized for throughput. Human review became the bottleneck to be minimized, not the safeguard to be honored. So how did we get here? The story doesn't begin with the Iran war. It begins much earlier, in the quiet corridors between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon, where a certain kind of handshake became routine, lucrative, classified, and consequential in ways that the public was never quite invited to understand. The major American artificial intelligence companies, the ones whose names you know, whose products sit on your phone, whose models generate your work emails and your children's homework, have, over the past several years, entered into a series of agreements with the United States Department of Defense. These contracts cover a range of services: logistics optimization, satellite image analysis, predictive maintenance, communications infrastructure, and, more recently, targeting assistance. The companies involved include some of the most prominent names in the AI industry. Google, after a very public internal revolt over Project Maven in 2018, eventually re-engaged with defense contracts in other forms. Microsoft has maintained and expanded its Pentagon relationships. Palantir, which began as a data analytics company, has been explicit about its role in military AI applications. Amazon Web Services underpins significant portions of the defense cloud infrastructure. What makes this moment different, and this is the detail worth sitting with, is what happened when the agreements expanded, when the definition of assistance quietly grew to include not just analysis but targeting recommendation, when the AI didn't just describe the battlefield it began in operational terms to shape it. Now here is where the paper trail gets interesting. Researchers at 3 independent institutions, the Future of Life Institute, the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, and a working group out of Oxford's Institute for Ethics in AI, began separately to track the same anomaly. The speed of the Iran war strike campaigns exceeded what human-led targeting cycles have historically been capable of producing, not by a little, by an order of magnitude. Strikes that would have required days of intelligence synthesis, legal review, and command authorization were being executed in hours, sometimes less. The researchers weren't accessing classified material. They were reading press releases, contracting documents released under Freedom of Information requests, and the public statements of defense contractors themselves, statements made, often with a certain pride in the efficiency being achieved. One document in particular became a quiet focal point in academic circles. A contract summary released through a defense procurement database referenced an AI-assisted dynamic targeting workflow integrated into theater operations during the conflict. The language was bureaucratic. It was also, to anyone who had spent time reading targeting doctrine, doctrine. Remarkable. Dynamic targeting, the selection of time-sensitive targets not identified in advance, is precisely the category of decision that international humanitarian law has always insisted requires the most rigorous human judgment. It is where mistakes cost civilian lives. It is where the law is most demanding, and it was, according to this document, being handed, at least in part, to a machine. Then something happened that most people missed entirely. Anthropic, the company behind Claude, one of the most capable large language model systems currently available, did not sign an agreement with the Pentagon. While peers entered the defense market, Anthropic declined. The company has been notably, and in the current climate almost stubbornly, public about maintaining what it calls its responsible scaling policy and its reluctance to permit its models to be used in lethal decision support contexts. This is not a small commercial decision. The defense AI market is worth tens of billions of dollars. Walking away from it, or not walking toward it, represents a real financial cost, and Anthropic walked. That choice landed differently once the scale of the Iran war AI deployment became clearer, because the systems that were integrated into that campaign were not Anthropic's, and the question of which AI systems were used and which guidelines governed their deployment, and whether those guidelines included anything resembling the ethical constraints that the industry has publicly championed, that question remains, as of today, substantially unanswered. The revelation, when you lay it out, is actually very quiet. There is no single villain, no obvious crime. What there is, instead, is a gap, a yawning structural gap between the commitments the AI industry has made in public, in Senate testimony, in op-eds and conference keynotes about responsible AI and ethical deployment, and what the evidence suggests actually happened when those systems were put to work in a live conflict. The gap is not a conspiracy. It's almost worse than that. It is what happens when the pressure to be useful, to be fast, to be competitive, to win the contract accumulates faster than the frameworks designed to constrain it. The machine didn't decide to be used this way. People did. Institutions did. And the public was watching something else. And here's the part that should concern all of us. The Iran war is not the end of this story. It is the proof of concept. Every military strategist, every defense ministry, every authoritarian government watching this conflict from a distance has now seen something demonstrated. That AI-assisted targeting works, that it accelerates campaigns beyond what human-paced warfare allows, and that the international mechanisms designed to prevent autonomous killing decisions have not, in practice, stopped anything. The UN debates continue. The white papers accumulate. The frameworks are revised. And the systems get faster. Academics have begun using a specific phrase to describe what they're observing. They call it automation bias in lethal contexts, the documented human tendency to defer to algorithmic recommendations, especially under pressure, especially when speed is rewarded and hesitation is penalized. When a targeting system produces a recommendation with a 92% confidence score, the human reviewer who overrides it is the one who has to explain themselves. The machine doesn't have to explain anything. And in 15,000 moments across one conflict, that asymmetry may have mattered enormously. Two questions remain open, and they are the ones worth carrying with you. The first, we do not yet have a full accounting of civilian casualties from AI-assisted strikes in this conflict. The data exists in some form in military databases. Independent investigators have requested it. It has not been released. The relationship between the speed of the targeting cycle and the accuracy and the human cost of those strikes is something we have not been permitted to examine. That should trouble everyone who believes accountability follows from transparency. The second question is harder. Anthropic's decision not to engage with Pentagon defense contracts has been noted. It has been, in some circles, quietly respected. But it also raises a question the industry has not answered. If one company declines and others proceed, does the restraint accomplish anything? Does. ethical refusal have strategic meaning in a market where the capability will be built by someone, deployed by someone, used by someone with or without the company that said no? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the central question of AI governance in the 21st century, and no one has answered it yet. The machine learned to choose the target. We taught it. The question now is whether we have the honesty and the institutional courage to look at what it chose